Welcome back, focused learners. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, well, we're tackling one of the most misunderstood events in human history. For centuries, the popular narrative has been remarkably simple, right? Almost like a fairy tale. You know the one. A tiny, daring band of Spanish conquistadors with superior technology sail across the ocean and single-handedly topple the mighty Aztec Empire. But as we're going to see in today's explainer, that story, it's a complete myth. The reality is far more complex, a whole lot more tragic, and honestly, incredibly fascinating. We're going to completely dismantle that old textbook narrative and look at the real anatomy of a collapse. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer shock embedded in these words. This is a direct quote from a Spanish conquistador who marched into central Mexico expecting to face warriors wielding, primitive sticks and stones. But instead, they encountered a highly sophisticated military culture wielding weapons like the macuahuito, an obsidian-edged club that could literally slice right through their expectations and their armor. This quote immediately shatters that illusion of a one-sided, technologically mismatched fight. I mean, the Spanish were terrified. So to understand how this massive empire actually fell, here's our roadmap for today. 1. Life in the empire. 2. The Aztec war machine. 3. The Spanish arrival. 4. The smallpox apocalypse. And finally, 5. The fall of Tenochtitlan. Let's dive right into Section 1, Life in the Empire, a truly sophisticated society. Right before the Spanish arrived on the shores of Mesoamerica, the capital city, Tenochtitlan, was a thriving metropolis. It was actually larger and cleaner than most European cities of the same era. And this brilliantly illustrates just how highly organized this civilization was. You can see it right in their social classes. Aztec society was rigidly divided, and you could literally see someone's status just by looking at what they wore and where they lived. On one side, you have the Pipiltin, the upper class. They controlled the government, religion, and the military, living in these grand homes and wearing ornate clothing. Then on the other side, you have the Masahualtin, the middle class. These were your farmers and merchants who lived in moderate homes and wore basic maxilot loincloths. It was a structure that was orderly, highly functional, and deeply ingrained in everyday life. But, life wasn't just about work and class. It was heavily steeped in religion and culture. Take Ola Malitzli, the famous Mesoamerican ball game. Players used their hips, forearms, and thighs to keep a heavy, 10-pound rubber ball in motion on a teological court. But get this, it wasn't just a sport. It was a deeply religious event representing the cosmic, daily battle between the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, and the moon. Religion and culture were so tightly woven together that children of the nobility actually learned this game systematically in their dedicated schools. Which brings us to Section 2. The Aztec war machine, ingenious and brutal. To maintain such a vast and wealthy society, the Aztecs relied heavily on regular military conquest. The Spanish absolutely didn't walk into a peaceful agrarian society. They walked straight into the teeth of a highly disciplined military machine. And that culture didn't start on the battlefield. It actually started in the classroom. Education was free and mandatory for all children, which was incredibly progressive. But look at how it was structured for the boys. The Telpakali schools focused on preparing the lower-class boys specifically for warfare, drilling them in weapons training from the age of 10. Meanwhile, the Cuauhtemoc schools prepared the noble boys for leadership in the military, priesthood, and government. By the time an Aztec boy reached age 20, he wasn't just a citizen, he was a fully integrated warrior. And man, they were equipped with an arsenal perfectly adapted for their environment. It was terrifying. You have the Atlatl, a spear thrower capable of launching darts with such immense velocity that they pierced right through Spanish cotton armor. Then there's the Tepozotlpili, a long spear fitted with obsidian blades that gave warriors the reach to pull Spanish cavalry right off their horses. They had slings hurling stones fast enough to crack skulls and completely disrupt formations, and the Cuauhtemoc, heavy, blunt force clubs used to literally crush helmets and armor. They didn't need steel, they had physics and obsidian. But the absolute crown jewel of this arsenal was the macuahuitl. This was the weapon that haunted the nightmares of the conquistadors. It's a wooden club edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades capable of inflicting devastating, deep cuts or stunning opponents with its flat side. I mean, this obsidian was sharper than surgical steel. According to multiple Spanish accounts, a single, well-aimed strike from a macuahuitl was powerful enough to decapitate a horse. It was an absolute marvel of deadly engineering. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 3, the Spanish arrival, alliances, and uprisings. In 1519, Hernán Cortés arrives on the coast of Mexico. So if the Aztecs were this powerful, how on earth did Cortés survive? Well, the answer is politics. The Aztec Empire was built on conquest, which meant they had a lot of resentful neighbors tired of paying heavy tributes. Cortés allied with the Tlaxcalan people, turning local resentments into his greatest weapon. Let's see how this builds chronologically, because it was definitely not a straight line to Spanish victory. In June 1520, the Aztecs actually successfully repelled the Spanish during La Noche Triste. They pushed the invaders out. But then, between September and October of 1520, smallpox reached Tenochtitlan. This completely changed the game before the Spanish forces struck again in May 1521, leading to the ultimate fall of the Aztec Empire in August. And that brings us to Section 4, the smallpox apocalypse, the unseen enemy. While swords and politics played their parts, the true conqueror of Mesoamerica was biological. It's a dark and somber chapter, but absolutely critical to understanding why the empire collapsed. 2 million to 5 million. That is the staggering, unimaginable estimate of the death toll from this single epidemic. The indigenous population had literally zero historical exposure to this virus brought over by a single Spanish soldier, meaning they had absolutely no immunity. The death rate was apocalyptic. The sensory details recorded from this time are just horrific. The disease struck so incredibly fast that whole families died of starvation in their beds. There were so many casualties that homes were simply collapsed over corpses to mask the fetid odor. And crucially, the virus didn't spare the elite. It killed the new emperor, Cuauhtemoc, and the Aztec chain of command was completely shattered, right when they needed their experienced military leadership the most. Which leads us into our final tragic chapter. Section 5, the fall of Tenochtitlan, Cuauhtemoc's final stand. It's 1521. Tenochtitlan is reeling, and into this apocalyptic scenario steps Cuauhtemoc, a fierce young warrior who takes power amidst a decimated population. Now, the surviving defenders were in agonizing conditions. They resorted to eating rats and grass, drinking brackish lake water just to survive. So the crucial point is that despite all of this, Cuauhtemoc steadfastly refused to surrender his people to the invaders. His sheer, unyielding willpower and resilience are just astounding. But eventually, the city fell. Cuauhtemoc was captured while fleeing, trying to organize a continued resistance. The Spanish, desperate for hidden gold, brutally tortured him by having his feet burned with hot oil. He never broke, though, and was ultimately hanged in 1525. Today, that barbarous torture and his unwavering defiance have cemented Cuauhtemoc as an enduring symbol of indigenous resistance and national pride in Mexico. And you know, when you break down the final numbers of the siege, the whole myth of a purely European conquest just completely falls apart. Yes, the Aztec defenders had about 80,000 warriors and 400 war canoes. But look at the Spanish coalition. Cortés had maybe 900 to 1,300 Spanish infantry and 86 cavalry, but he had between 50,000 and 200,000 native allies. The fall of Tenochtitlan relied heavily on hundreds of thousands of indigenous allies. It was in many ways a massive indigenous civil war, catalyzed by the Spanish. Which leaves us with one of the most profound what-ifs in human history. We've seen their highly organized society, their terrifying war machine, and the fact that they initially pushed the Spanish out. So I leave you with this. If the invisible enemy of smallpox had never arrived on the shores of Mesoamerica, would the formidable Aztec war machine have successfully defended their empire? It really forces you to reconsider the myth of European dominance, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, and I'll see you next time.